This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
Thank you so much again for joining me today. So let's start a little bit about your journey entering the space into public safety. How did you get involved with law enforcement, and can you tell us a little bit about the trajectory of your career?
Sure. So I actually came into law enforcement almost by mistake. I came from a law enforcement family. My father was a police officer for 40 years, and I have a twin brother who was a police officer, but I was going to school for business. So I was going to go in and do all those things you do in business, but I ended up taking on a job while I was in college, catching shoplifters. And so I started interacting with police officers and doing those things as a way of paying my bills, quite frankly. And I got a taste for this, and I felt a real calling for it. I felt a much stronger that this would give me the opportunity to give back to my community much more so than going into business, and there's that. So that was a long time ago. That was 33 years ago or so, and I went to Prince George's County Police Department, which is a large police department, at the time, about 1,700 officers. It's one of the 50 largest in the country. It's on the Washington, D.C. border. Quite frankly, high crime, significant issues. So I did my career there. I came up through the ranks. I was a patrol officer. I was a detective. I did a host of things on that department, almost worked in every aspect of it or was in charge of it, to include I was the chief of detectives, and if you can imagine the crime, we had it. Seen a whole lot of things. I was in internal affairs, and so I've seen the downside of law enforcement, some of the things they can do to themselves, or that some of the distrust the community has. And I've actually had the experience of actually arresting officers and firing and terminating things for misbehavior. And I've commanded a district station. Upon retiring from there, at least what I thought was retirement, I applied to a job at a college. And I'm at Northern Virginia Community College, which is second largest community college in the country. And I'll be honest with you, I thought, okay, I've been in this big police department. I've seen more things than I can even remember and experienced a lot. And I thought to myself, this is a college. How hard can it be? And, I'll tell you, I was right, but I was wrong at the same time. I was right in that I was thinking along those lines of what law enforcement thinks about. But I was very wrong in that there's a whole lot of extra aspects and intricacies when you get to the college level, and federal involvement and other people's involvement, other units, that I didn't foresee. And it became a much more complex, complicated situation. So I've been doing that for 12 years. In addition to doing the police department here, I also have Office of Emergency Management and Safety. So I came in here on the heels of right after Virginia Tech. We're in Virginia. About a year and a half later here at college, a student tried to kill an instructor. And
wow.
I came in 6 months after that, yes. And it was a very scared environment. They had done a lot to look at things, but they hadn't taken any action. The police department was decentralized on 6 different campuses. And so I came in and took on all that, and years later I think we had a very solid foundation.
Wow. So, it sounds like a guiding force for you was giving back to your community, which I think is so important and a great motivation for anybody in law enforcement. And so I'm curious about how that transition worked for you out of municipal law enforcement into campus law enforcement, and how the background in municipal law ended up informing or helping you in your transition to campus law enforcement.
So when I came in, of course, I've got my training for big municipal police, which was really good in that I had the crime aspects. I had managed multiple, it was really where I came from was 6 different district stations. And being the levels I had gotten to on that department, I was managing different stations. When I came here with 6 different campuses, it was kind of a plug and play mentality. But it was a very different aspect in that foremost on municipal policing, it was all about fighting crime. Come to the college campus, that's there, but that's not the primary aspect. Not what people are watching. Nobody here asks what our crime statistics are. It's every day, multiple times a day in the municipal environment I was in. People want to know what's your how many crimes do you have of different types? What are your closure rates? It's very different in the college environment. So I would say in municipal policing, if you use the protect and serve model, it's in the municipal model, 80% protect, 20% serve. My experience in the college, you flip that around. It's 80% serve, 20% protect. It doesn't mean you're not taking it seriously, you're not doing the same aspects, but you're much more integrated into the environment here than in a lot of municipalities, which has pros and cons. It can be much more difficult and things. So, but having the experience to come in and look at things in a large professional police department, was able to bring a lot of those aspects and centralized operations here. I mentioned, for instance, we have 6 different campuses. When I arrived, they were decentralized. There was no dispatching, there was no daily reporting. So all the basic things that police departments, large municipal police departments, take care of, it didn't exist. And there really wasn't a sense of urgency to get that done. But bringing those experiences in, having the connections back in the community to my fellow law enforcement, that's such an integral piece. Knowing who to turn to and what other agencies I can get resources from is critical.
Yeah. Do you think that there are lessons that that the campus law enforcement model needs to learn from municipal law, or that lessons municipal law enforcement can take from campus? Is there a way, do you think, that where we can integrate more of the protecting and the serving in both of those different modes of doing law enforcement?
I think there is a perfect nexus somewhere. I don't know what that balance is. If I wish that learning, now being on a campus and being here for these number of years, being as integrated as we are with the campus, if that model, if that sense of togetherness existed within the communities and municipal policing, I think a lot of the issues would solve themselves. But at the same time, what you can end up with on the campuses is a sense of hands-off, and that can breed another sense of issues with crime arising or not getting into it, or over-policing, as I say. You have to be careful, no matter what environment, not to over-police. You have to see what environment you're in and adapt. So looking where it's not just the police telling the community, this is how the policing is going to happen, which happens in municipal policing, but also in colleges and campuses. The police have to also start listening to what the community really wants as they're policing. And if you fail to hear that or pay attention to it, a lot of the strife and conflict occurs. So back to the campus environment, there's so many more entities involved in what the police do. So if I was a municipal police officer and I was involved in something and I had a crime or I made an arrest or any of those things, the municipal police aren't completely self-contained, but much more so than on a campus. Meaning they might make an arrest of somebody, and that person, has the misfortune of going to jail or whatever occurs, and then the police officer and the chief and others go about their business, unless it's some high-profile VIP. On a campus, there's a lot of other ripple effects that happen. So, and I say this in a way to make a point, there's a lot of other people in the police business, or the police's business. So it could be a Title IX infraction. There could be an HR issue. There could be clarity requirements. There's provosts and deans that have jobs to do based on what occurred or what maybe there might be provosts or professors that have obligations to do. So it isn't just we do our policing and then we disappear. We've got to make sure that these other folks also can take care of their business and that they know we're going to watch out for them. Facilities departments, there's any number of these folks that have obligations because of the actions we did or we didn't do.
Right.
So it is and I think that's a real balance. It's got to be weighed. And then another really important aspect that I came to see is when you come to a campus, you're in a situation where you're not only enforcing the laws and law enforcement, but you've got a lot of policy that you go in and out of the policy world at a campus. So a campus may say, here's our rules, but that doesn't make it against the law. And so if you are a police department where you have the authority of the state, you have a badge, you have a gun, you have these things, this ability to take away somebody's civil liberties, it's incumbent that on the campus, that police police department is very aware of what's a policy versus a law and when to enforce appropriately. You never want to use your law enforcement powers to take away somebody's civil liberties based on a policy violation. You're asking for trouble, and it's way too easy on a campus just to want to help out. As the police or security, if you're the police, you have this authority to say, yes, we'll assist. Well, you get yourself into a slippery slope where you may end up, if it goes bad, doing things or use of force, and you can't win that argument. Somebody's smoking or not smoking zoning. At the end of the day, what'd you do? Well, we ended up arresting them, and we had a use of force, or they were disorderly in a classroom, or they weren't listening to the instructor. You can't really win that. And so, thinking outside of what are your options is critical. So, one thing I'll explain that. So, for instance, it happens every day in high schools, colleges, everywhere. There's a student somewhere that wants to test the professor or doesn't want to listen. And then you get to the point where the instructor has just had enough. That's it. I've had enough. I can't take any more of this. I'm going to call the police. Now, if you have your own college police department, they call, we respond. Now, for this example, let us say it's a student on a cell phone, something everybody can relate to. And the instructor said to get off, and they didn't get off the phone. It was just texting or something else. The police respond because they're going to respond to a call. We got a conflict right away that we have to figure out how best to manage. It shouldn't be blind faith to the instructor, and it shouldn't be automatic action against the student or whoever is the alleged violator. You have to maintain a objectivity. Although this may be our coworker who's this instructor, we may know them. That doesn't mean that we're going to do their bidding just because, especially if it's a policy violation. So, get there, but how do you save face? These are things a lot of times in the community the police don't have to get into, but how do you save face in this situation? Well, consider that the instructor may have said, I'm calling the police, you're out of my class, when they get here, you're done, I don't ever want to see you in here again, or whatever is said. Well, the police then show up. Well, try to save face with the instructor, so I give this instruction to my officers when they come to work for me and say, look, consider your options, in addition to knowing whether it's policy or law. Talk to that instructor first, if you can. If it's an obvious law violation or somebody's getting hurt, take care of business. But talk to this instructor and say, what do you want? What can we do? And manage the expectations. And most times we can call the student out and speak to them and they'll voluntarily leave. But what happens if it's a policy violation and the student says, I'm not leaving? And they're on the phone. Now everybody's watching. Everybody's got their phones out, videotaping. And the police are in that position. What are you going to do? Right? Well, and I've tried to get instructors to go along with this as well. Say, well, let's disengage. Let's win. Let everybody win. Say, okay, professor, if you can't go on any longer with this student doing what's upsetting you, then I suggest you dismiss the class for the day. We leave the student sitting in the classroom alone with the lights off. There's no audience. There's no confrontation. We refer them for discipline the next day, and we go about our way. Right? But too often, law enforcement, especially, is feeling they have to win that immediate confrontation. And there's more ways than one to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I think that everything you just said is so important as it relates to trust and students trusting that law enforcement is going to do the right thing by them and having conversations with your officers, ensuring that you guys don't sever that trust in your community. Because if you don't have the trust of the campus, then what do you got, right? So I think having this conversation is so important, and I'm wondering, what are some other things that you have done to get the word out there and to explain to students and show students that you are on their side?
Yeah, so it's a nonstop, never-ending approach. So for me, when I came here, I'm a firm believer in community policing. Now, I'll be honest with you, probably every chief would say yes, right? If you asked them if you're a believer. And community policing, or community outreach as we call it, is evolved over time, and it means a lot of different things. So my experience was that you have to engage and empower people to take actions on their own and explain to them what the limitations are the police are going to do and not do before the events occur. So you're looking at multiple things there. It's conversations that explain why we do what we do or don't do, and empowering people to take action. So what I had seen in the past was a lot of times there's a philosophy of community outreach or community policing and this building this trust, but it's kind of a haphazard approach. I deliberately wanted to make sure this was at the forefront of what we were doing here. So I assigned officers and a high-ranking officer also that was their job. They weren't going to go out there and enforce things. They weren't going to respond to calls for service, although they can. This is what you will do. And we will find creative ways to get our messaging in any way we can, that's a positive aspect, to students, staff, and faculty, and honestly to the surrounding communities any way we can. And so, everything from the traditional ways. We did a newsletter which it's got so much information. It's not just, hey, look, we graduated somebody from the academy. There's an article in there that might be in addition to something about our department, might be about here's tips on this, or did you know that we have this capability, or here's, it could be any number of things. And we do that every month. We have constant outreach events where we're finding officers to be not only in public areas, but finding ways to get them invited into classrooms. And one of our most interesting ways was to find these instructors that were interested and have our officer go in there, and whatever that topic was, whether it was English or sociology or business, and have a conversation as to how that topic relates back to law enforcement, intertwine it, and opening those dialogues, having our officers involved with international students, becoming sponsors, and just constantly finding ways to interact. Because you're right, they've got to trust the police, at least for effective. We have another saying that we came to where first responders can't do it all. And the reason we would say that is not just on campuses, but it certainly is on campuses, but in communities, we have, as society, come to rely on law enforcement for way too much beyond their role. And law enforcement, wanting to help and assist, says, okay. And then what's happening now is things are tipping a bit, I think, and people are now recognizing, well, why do we have the police involved in this? And why do we have the police involved in that? Well, those are a lot of things that probably shouldn't have, but because you can pick up the phone and call, and we're going to show up, whereas you might have to wait a day or two or some other, not have any other avenue, the police respond. Now, I don't think we'll ever get out of that, but we wanted, as part of the outreach and trust, is teach people here, we will be there, we will always assist you, we'll never leave you hanging, but here's your other options for some things. And don't always assume that the police should be there is a good answer, because, and I teach this to the officers all the time, the moment a police officer is somewhere, the uniform, it doesn't matter who they are, it's not about the person, the uniform, the badge, the gun, it changes the environment. The minute they're there, because we all as police get used to being around each other. You could put 30 of us in a room in uniforms and guns and badges, and we don't even think about it. But the moment a police officer walks into a store, a classroom, or a cafeteria, or any number of places or a dispute, it changes. Because now you have governmental authority there. And so I tell the officers, and this is what we talk to college here as much as we can, never lose that aspect of what the influence is. And don't abuse it. Some examples. One of the very common things, and I think it occurs across the country, not just in higher ed, but other places, is when somebody's going to be terminated, they want the police there. Okay? So they're worried that this person's going to be disruptive or possibly dangerous. And so they say, can you have the officers there? And way too often, they'd be like, sure. So if somebody's going to be terminated, they're asked to come into the HR department or whatever it is. I'm not saying this, Northern Virginia's HR work this way, but come in, and they walk in, they see their boss or the HR representative, then they see a uniformed police officer standing there. We have immediately set a bad tone by doing that, unless there's immediate danger. Because what we did is we put an officer there, and it's telling the person, your people don't trust you so much, they think so little of you, that the police had to be there. It's insulting. So we'll be there, but in a different measure. Or if things are occurring where other entities are having events, we'll be there, but don't make us the center of it. And so, building trust. And then there's another aspect. Having been in law enforcement, for these years, I feel comfortable saying, criticizing my own profession. I have noticed over time that I think law enforcement can be disrespectful to people. And it's always driven me crazy. I've always thought that that's a problem we have. And the law officers have to be safe. They have to evaluate the scenarios they're in. So when they walk up to somebody, the person knows who they are because of what they're wearing and they call it. The officers don't really know the situation, so they have to be safe. But there are often times when officers make the situation worse because they bring an attitude or they bring a chip on their shoulder. And that is something that I think needs to change. And insisting on that from the chief's level or the supervisor, constantly watching that and correcting that is important. I know when I've been off duty as a police officer, and I'm in plain clothes and it doesn't say police anywhere, and I've approached officers or encountered them somehow. There's a few instances where I didn't like the way it went. Not because I was violating something, just because of how I felt like I got treated. So that makes me think, well, how must others think? I'm part of that group. I get it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
And so if you're mistreated like that, or you think you're mistreated, okay, now whether it's really mistreatment, you're going to tell other people, right? You're going to tell your family. You're going to tell other folks. And so every opportunity for us to make ourselves approachable when we can, when it's not a conflict situation, is critical. And I think, as a chief, my position is find those opportunities, and that's how you build a trust.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree that I think that is all so important, and a great way to continue to build trust in the community is engaging in those conversations and continuing to reinforce the idea that you are working in service to protect the people in the campuses, or if it's municipality in the city. So I wanted to ask you, in the wake of the increase of gun violence, some have suggested that we need to increase security presence on campuses. And we just talked a lot about the message that police could potentially send. But on the flip side of that, it is important to have people around who are trained to de-escalate and respond in the event of a tragedy. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. What do you think is a possible solution from a law enforcement perspective to keep people safe in the wake of potential gun violence?
Right. So this is, of course, a very deep subject. We could probably discuss a lot of options within this. So let's talk even before the gunman shows up. Let's talk about that. So safety, this is just something I say grammatically, it may not be correct, but safety is a feeling, not a fact. Okay, so think about it for a second. People want to feel safe. They want to go somewhere where they feel safe, that they feel like they're important, that they're contributing, that they can report things. That all goes hand in hand. If you've got situations where you have a safe environment, meaning, because safety is an individual thing, let me back up a bit. If you've got a person who grew up in a certain environment, then going to other environments is going to make them feel unsafe. So I'll use the country mouse, city mouse example. The country mouse grows up, there's no streetlights. There's all kinds of critters out in the woods. There's all kinds of scary things, and there's no police anywhere in the country. They're spread out. Come to the city mouse is like used to seeing a police officer everywhere. There's lights everywhere. There's noises. That makes them feel safe because it's a quick response. So when you start putting police officers on every street corner, or in every campus, or every building, that's going to have an interesting effect. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to feel scared by it. So, the safe environment. Looking to what the environment is. Are there reporting mechanisms where people can report things of concern? Student, staff, faculty see somebody that gives them concern or issues. Do they feel safe and empowered to report that and do something about it? A lot of times people look the other way because they think it's somebody else's problem. So do they have an environment? Does that place have a way to report, or police officers that they feel like they can tell that to, or security guards? Somebody who's going to do something about that. If they're not comfortable or they don't trust that authority, most times they're not going to do anything about it. And they feel the officers are approachable. Interesting, as we've seen in the past couple of years, some people don't want police officers on campus anymore. Some would prefer to have just security. I can make an argument that police are there because you get a better response. They're higher trained. They've been through more backgrounds and things. But be careful what you ask for, because there's a high price to pay, not just in terms of dollars, because it's much more expensive. When you bring a law enforcement, when you convert a security to a law enforcement, or you bring police officer on campus, it's much more complex than people realize. It's just to touch on it, the hiring standards is significantly more detailed. Training is exponentially higher. Oversight and expectations are much higher. Everybody, for everything. Liabilities increase. The jurisdictional issues get very complicated. You police off campus. Some college campuses will say we have a jurisdiction here, we can go a mile out, or you have mutual aid with local jurisdictions. Then there's all these federal things, and some of the Freedom of Information Act, FERPA, Federal Labor Standards Acts are different for police officers. There's something called Garrity, where certain rights are guaranteed. There's what's called Brady issues, where police officers, if they have misconduct, it's got to be reported to Commonwealth's attorneys or state's attorneys. There's a different IRS regulations, constitutional concerns, privacy, records retention. It goes on and on. If you're a police department, so getting to the gun issue. I don't have the answer for that. I wish I could tell you right here, Michael, that I have the answer for that. I don't. But from my expertise, I would say this: if you're going to have a police department on campus, I think there's a couple of things to key on. It's not about what uniforms are we going to wear, what's the cars going to look like, what kind of guns are we going to have. Those are the simple, low-hanging fruit. You've got to have, first and foremost, I believe, a chief who's paying attention to crime, which we talked about before, but watching for there's some serious pitfalls and slippery slopes for the over-reliance on police. Back to the issue we were discussing. And if you shouldn't be calling the police as your first option, they should be your last. So if you're calling the police for every single thing right away and they're responding, there's something out of balance. We've gotten to rely on that too much. Now, if you think it's a gunman or a dangerous issue, certainly. But what are your other resources? If the police are coming in, and the police should never look like an occupying army. And that's going to be the over-reliance. Call after call, we're going to handle this. We don't want that. So to have an effective police department, they must be trained, committed, unified with the local law enforcement who's around them, because if a major event happens, they're going to be using the same tactics and things and train with them. But they must look appropriate for the culture of the campus they're patrolling. They shouldn't be, in my opinion, looking like that occupying army where everybody's scared of them, where they don't want to approach them, and they're afraid to tell them anything. Because time after time after time, when these shootings occur, the studies come out and say, this person heard about this, or there was leakage, they call it, or this person knew something but didn't tell anybody. So if we are aware of it, we don't always have the answers, but usually, in most cases, we can take some action. So it's hopefully prevent.
Yeah. So we've spoken about so many different ways to build trust in the community, the benefits of community policing. Students in colleges and universities will watch our interview, and I just want them to be able to hear from you. As a chief of campus safety, what is your message to students who may have their reservations about law enforcement and policing? What do you want to say to them, and what are some ways that we can work as students to continue to forge that really necessary bond?
That's a great question. So I think in the majority of cases of things I've seen, the police departments on college campuses are really a more integrated best practice model, more so than municipal policing sometimes, which is really having worked in both worlds. And so you're going to get at college or university more often than not, a police department that represents your interests and wants to help you because they're integrated where you are. They believe in it. They work there. They're part of that. They're not just handling a call, hopefully, and leaving and don't care. They'll take more time. They'll help you, hopefully, solve your problems, get you to the right people. And a lot of times, they're not, calls aren't stacked up like they might be, say, in a municipal, where it's just handle a call, go to the next call, handle a call, go to the next call. They can get you the resources, and they're invested in that. And they're probably going to see that student or faculty member, whoever's having the issues they're helping with, again the next day. And we get to develop those relationships. So what I would say is, give it a chance. You know, there's a lot of news out there, and there's a lot of things you see. And as a police chief and being in this profession for these years, I cringe at a lot of those videos too. I get mad. There's a lot of law enforcement that get really upset about it. But they're not going to come across campus and tell you that. If you have them in a conversation though, and you know them to be a good person, hopefully they treat you well. You'll say, hey, I know Dan. That's not how he acts. And when something happens, it's a tough profession. I'm not going to say it's not, but thinking on your own experiences and giving it an opportunity, just like any other human being, police have their own personalities. You might have an instructor who is really great, and then see another one who's terrible. That doesn't mean they're all terrible. And giving that opportunity. If you approach the police, they don't know who you are, remember that. But that doesn't mean you can't have that conversation and just say hello to them. It's really one of the most refreshing things ever, especially in today's world, to know that people still say hello to us. You know, as I mentioned with the uniform, sometimes people want to look the other way. But if we can receive that hello, it makes it much easier for us to say it. We should be the ones initiating it, law enforcement. But sometimes it works both ways. You get a smile from somebody, you give a smile back. It goes both ways. But give us a chance.
100%. Wow. Well, Chief, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you for being a part of ZeroNow, and thank you for all that you have done to work to keep us safe. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
This is a great interview. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.